Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. This is Daybreak and the hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Yes, Senator Mugotan, I'll come to you then.
Yes, I wanted to just assure the Honorable Senator Kajwang that, in fact, the current administration has been really focused on pushing the manifesto that we went into power with. We have been focused on delivering what we promised the people of Kenya, and we don't need any boogeyman because we are actually doing the work. And I wanted to remind him, and Kenyans listening to me, that in fact, if you look at Q3 of the Kenya National Bureau of Standards Statistics, they will tell you Q3 of 2023, agriculture got a boost, because of the policies, The export was increased for flowers to 84%, vegetables 35% increase. The trade deficit decreased by about 15.9%. It shrank. What we are saying is that the basic fundamentals are going well. In fact, we had this debate a lot about the high cost of living, and the president broke it into two. He said it's the cost of food and the cost of fuel. So far, in 2 months, we have been reducing that cost of fuel. It has been going down. Food prices have been going down. In fact, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics is telling us the prices of maize has reduced by about 14.9%. So I'm saying, and then there are other good things that have been happening, like we've had good harvests. Inflation has gone down from 6.9, we're talking about 6.6% now. So I want to assure my friend that, in fact, we have been focused on the fundamentals and we are pushing that agenda. But that does not stop us from also asking some questions. And I want to agree with him that there is no institution that is made of angels. All our institutions have problems. And indeed, it is their business as opposition to point out the faults that are within the executive. Yeah. But it is our collective business as opposition and the side of government to point out the ills that are within parliament and to point out the ills that are within the judiciary. So when we are saying that there is a problem, and that problem we need to have a discussion and see what we can do about it, I think Kenyans need to get away from the idea that every person who is in power or any person, if it is your MP, if it is your senator, if it's your governor or your president, when they say something, they mean something bad. I think it is good for us to start having this discussion. Okay, we are having an issue if it is parliament or if it is executive. What do we do about it as Kenyans? What do we do about it if it is judiciary? If it is the independent commissions, what do we do about them? I think this is the way, from where I see it, that we need to approach this issue and have a very sober discussion. I am looking at some of the headlines here, and I see that Justice Kome, who is a very polished lawyer and practiced for many years, she's saying they are ready to have a meeting to discuss with the executive that need arises. They are ready. Okay. And I think that is the attitude that we should be taking. We should start ignoring some of the political temperatures that are being raised around this issue. When people now think this is the political issues to discuss, they use it and yet the institution itself is saying, we are ready for any discussion. We are ready for any, in fact, she stated categorically, if there are any bad apples, integrity of the judiciary, we are not going to compromise on that. Well, Senator, so I think her attitude is the way we should go.
As you point that out, I mean, when you talk about disregarding, I'll come to that question because you have pointed out some figures, and in the last quarter of the last year, on the state of economy generally, this is from the Kenya Revenue Authority, we had import values which had declined by 0.8%, that's negative. from 661 billion financial years 22-23 to 23-24 to 655 billion. Diesel consumption the same period, for example, because this is very key, we talked about fuel, reduced by 56,000 metric tons for that period. The same year, petrol had declined by 28,000 metric tons. The Revenue Authority also adds that low private sector business perception, cost pressures, drop in customer brands, reduced manufacturing output. These are the realities on the ground.
That is one side, but I've also quoted the Kenya National Bureau Standard Statistics, and they are giving us the realities. And I mean, even EPRA has announced the drop of the petrol prices. So maybe the period you are quoting is slightly different from but I'm talking about the last quarter of 2020.
Which is still the same quarter.
Yes, and I'm telling you, you could have that side, but we are also saying there are good things happening in this. The inflation has gone down. Cruise ships are coming. Cruise tourism is coming up. We are going in the right direction.
Thank you. Among the other many factors, allow me to bring in Diana. You will proceed. Yes, please, Diana.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And I just want to highlight that when the judiciary had their State of the Judiciary address, they were very reflective. And they highlighted the areas they feel they have grown and the areas they still have challenges. The cases and complaints that are in the statement released yesterday are very comprehensively addressed in the State of the Judiciary. Now, cases of indiscipline, malpractices, lack of accountability in the judiciary were envisioned in the Constitution. And that is why the Judicial Service Commission is there, to guard the judicial independence and judicial accountability. All we need to do is move it, and we should be able to guard against anything that goes wrong in that particular institution. Do we have similar mechanisms in the executive?
But there is Parliament that has to oversight the executive, is it?
That is one, Parliament oversight. And let's go back. One of the things that was highlighted, Ayub, let me first acknowledge the memo that came from Cabinet yesterday, created the single treasury account. For us as TISA and Okoa Uchumi, this is something we laud, but it needs to be immediately accompanied by double accrual accounting, so that you're not just putting all government accounts together and then we do not know what comes in and what comes out. Because whereas we have an issue of debt that the president decries and said, I think the leader of majority in the National Assembly stated that we have a problem of debt that was accumulated against the advice of Parliament. If that is correct, that's corruption. The Cabinet Secretary, who was responsible for matters of Treasury and disregarded the oversight of Parliament. Parliament is ultimately the holder of the public purse in this country. If that was disregarded, I think that is where the energy should be, in holding people who have created this corruption crisis around public debt, that we must use 7 shillings to repay debt. And it's going to increase because the Eurobond payment was last year 312. If we go by the current exchange rate, it's 360 billion. A debt that we always have contention by independent institutions, whether it actually came to Kenya, and if it came, was it used according to the Constitution? That's where the energy should be, so that we now stop using 3 shillings for recurrent expenditure. There's even no money for development, even as we get angry around court orders. We need to quickly safeguard our fiscal accountability space. So yes, the decision to have single treasury account is a good one, but needs to be immediately accompanied by double accrual accounting. That will make it easier for the Office of the Controller of Budget to be able to verify that what Parliament appropriated is what is actually being used.
And she seemed to have a major concern here. She said, I have been approving payments for public debt, and I've seen many of those things cannot be identified. You cannot tell what the money was meant for, and therefore there was no economic gain from that borrowing, and that is what we have been doing for a very long time. There's a leadership failure, is it?
Yes, there's a very serious leadership failure there, and I think that is where we should focus all our efforts this year around.
Do you think Parliament can stand up to the responsibility?
I always hold that Parliament has the capacity, has the resources, both, look at the people you have on this panel. Intellectuals, they went to school, they understand, they live with this problem. Immediately, they realize that they are appointed on the power of the Constitution, not of political parties. And they do the right thing according to their mandate. We will stop this lack of accountability, the continued misappropriation, misdirection of funds.
Thank you.
By now, we should be cutting certain expenses. I don't think this is really the time to be renovating state houses. When our schools do not have capitation, when our hospitals, I think it's just austerity.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Moses Kajwang.
Well, you know, my friend Senator Mungatana, on the floor of the House, regularly tells us about the social contract.
Correct.
And as a principle, that organized humanity behind government and this kind of structures that we have. And one of the basic underpinnings of that social contract is, you know, we are allowing you to rule us as long as there are certain rules that we all are going to subscribe to. And so I agree with the Chief Justice that it is that rule of law and that respect for the rule of law that has kept Kenya together. In fact, people wonder how Kenya runs. I've been to neighboring countries. You go to neighboring countries, they're clean and all nice, but you can't speak. You have no voice. In Kenya, you have voice. You have alternatives. If your neighbor offends you, you can go to court and seek an alternative. And once there is a resolution of the courts, you live with it, you live by it, you abide by it. That is what modern and organized societies, that's how they're built. The only unfortunate thing I heard from the Chief Justice yesterday was a call for dialogue. I don't know whether it was Justice Chunga who said, dialogue for what, on what, and about what? What are they going to dialogue over? Are they fighting? Is it an admission that the judiciary and the executive have been in a fight? Because you only call for dialogue when two parties are warring. I don't think the judiciary has been on the warpath against the executive, the way the executive is trying to frame it. So I think the calls for dialogue perhaps might be well-intended, but it is going to portray the judiciary as weak and as being the smaller party. If it is going to be dialogue, where will it be held? At State House or within the precincts of the Supreme Court? Who will chair? The President of the Republic of Kenya or the President of the Supreme Court? So Justice Martha Koome must protect and defend the institution that she leads, because it is an institution that is a co-equal to the other arms of government. You know, when we start using KNBS statistics to tell Kenyans that things are okay, KNBS, which is a department that is funded by the national government, a national government that has got a very high penchant for propaganda, go and tell the parents who are admitting their children to Form 1 today that things have improved. I am a parent. I bought a pair of shoes at almost 3,000 Kenya shillings, a school sweater at about 3,000 Kenya shillings, things that were almost half the price 2 years ago. Go and tell that, my dear friend Mungatana, to the flood victims of Tana River. I know how the floods wreaked havoc in Tana River. And I know that schools are reopening, and some schools have not even been built. Some children are going to find their schools submerged. Go and tell the employed person who is looking at their payslip. This is the middle of January, and they say January has got 90 days. Go and tell that person today that the government is improving their livelihoods and that they should now be happy because you exported more flowers or because the price of food went down. The price of food did not go down because of any significant deliberate government policy. No. It was because of God. No. It was because of good rainfall. And I can tell you that in Homa Bay County...
The project has an effect.
Would you allow me? Homa Bay County never received fertilizer.
Okay.
And I am the senator for Homa Bay, and I've been the senator for the last 6 years.
But
we never received fertilizer.
Was a factor.
It was not a factor in Homa Bay. I'm talking about Homa Bay. You could talk about Tana River.
Yes.
In Homa Bay County, we have received 2 bountiful harvests, not because the government gave us seed, not because the government gave us fertilizer, not because the government gave us extension services, but because God loves us. He gave us rain. It is raining even today at this point in Homa Bay County, where it rarely rains in January. So let us not steal the thunder. Let us not steal God's thunder and then start attributing some of the things that God has done to us to the genius of a government.
Oh, thank you.
The truth is that we have a government that is on autopilot and a government that will soon run out of bogeymen.
Let me
say
something.
It will get to a point where they'll be blaming Kenya.
Thank you.
Let me say something.
Yes, sir, as you say that, okay, say it then.
Let me say something.
Briefly.
You know, I was watching President Biden when he was giving his first statement as a campaign statement, and he went somewhere near where President Trump and his people had done that bad thing they were doing in Washington the other day, sort of like trying to...
The capital takeover.
Yeah, the capital takeover. It was somewhere near there. And he gave this statement, that the election of America was going to be about whether you want to respect the Constitution or not, whether you want to have a person who has respect for Constitution or not. But you see, the media were trying to make a build-up. So what did they do? They brought the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, of the US, and she was giving the figures. She said, look, the fundamentals are good. The interest rates have gone down. The markets have been rallying. We have expanded the labor opportunities. We are actually employing more. This is what the figures are showing us. Okay? Then the person who is seated at your chair there asked her, say, but Americans are still complaining the pocket, you know, the same way Honorable Kajwang is saying. And this was a simple answer. She said, once the figures and the economic fundamentals are in place, they will then start trickling down over a period of time. Americans are going to feel that effect over time. And I'm also telling Honorable Kajwang that don't cast aspersion on the Kenya National Bureau of Standards statistics. The facts are there. EPRA has said it. It's a fact. Juguna, our cabinet secretary, said that we have paid the 10.8 billion on interest on the Eurobond in December. Those facts are there. The facts are there to speak for the pointed economic general shift. Because those of us who live in the coast know for a fact the entire December and part of January, you could not get bookings in Coast Province. Why? Because people spending capacity is increasing. The opposition will never come out and say that. The opposition will never come out to congratulate the administration. That's a fact, and we expect that of them. But the truth of the fact is the fundamentals have shifted, and they are shifting.
Okay.
And the fact is, like Janet Yellen said, it may take time for us to realize it in our pockets.
Okay.
But it's headed in that general
Okay, and 4 years later, and ahead of the elections in November, Biden is the lowest ranked ever American president in modern day history.
I mean, I don't know how relevant that is.
Well, it's relevant.
No, it is not relevant to what I'm talking about.
I mean, there are
I'm talking about
that's a trickle down.
Yellen and her statement. Okay. I'm talking about what Yellen has said and the figures. And what Yellen has said is that the figures can be right, but it will take time before the American pocket feels the relief. And I'm saying the same thing. The figures are right. It will take time before the Kenyan pocket feels the same thing.
To my question now.
Yeah.
On New Year's Eve, the president had kick-started this debate, and yesterday we had seen the second substantive response from the Chief Justice.
Yes.
the Kenya Kwanza administration had grievances about the conduct of certain judges.
Yes.
They were unnamed
Yes.
because of stalling government projects, and these are court orders.
Yes.
But why would the deputy president, and can you explain to the Kenyan people why then
Yes.
it has moved from court orders that had stopped pet government projects, the housing, the healthcare plan,
Yes.
to a personal interest case that the DP now says, this was a case against me and this judge handled this matter.
Yes.
Why the sudden evaporation from national interest matters
Yes.
to personal interest cases, for example, the deputy president's case?
Now, let me just say this. On the question of a personal interest, that this one was handled or mishandled, that one he can speak for himself. Surely, if you feel that you have been mishandled by a judge, and maybe you didn't know some of these processes are available, but because of this conversation, you are now being told you can actually do a complaint. You can actually have your day with the Judicial Service Commission. Then he has awoken to that reality and he wants to file. I think that is his...
You mean the former Madeira lawmaker and the deputy president of Kenya never knew about the filing process?
I didn't say never knew. Don't put words in my mouth.
You used the word may.
I said may. So that's the same, no, it's not like never knew. I'm just saying this conversation is triggering certain results. This conversation is making people realize that, you see, I can actually complain against something and I can make my complaint at the JSC if I need to, okay? But just before I go to the other point, I wanted to make this point, that in Parliament, we have the Parliamentary Service Commission, and there are rules on how to complain against a senator or a member of parliament who is sitting member of parliament. But that does not stop people and does not take away the freedom to express yourself when you are disappointed with Senate or senators, or you are disappointed with a member of parliament or the National Assembly. So this argument that we should only talk about judges at the Judicial Service Commission does not hold water. Because even those that existed there, that is, if you make a decision to go straight to that, it is upon you. But sometimes you are just complaining and maybe even your complaint doesn't reach the threshold, but you know something isn't right somewhere. Okay? Well, same like with Parliament. Okay. You could have some issues with some senator, some MP. There's the Parliamentary Service Commission you can complain to. Same with the Law Society of Kenya. You can complain about an issue. In fact, there's a whole complaint mechanism. But that doesn't stop you from going at home or going outside and saying, look, that lawyer did not treat me well, or that magistrate or that judge didn't treat me well. We shouldn't take that away. And I'm saying, let us have this conversation. Why is this fear so much? Even the judges themselves are saying, look, we have these mechanisms, let us talk about it. What the president, I think, has pushed so much from where I sit is that let us have this conversation. Let us talk about it. And let us ask ourselves questions, you know, like, should public projects be stopped? And I remember the other president, the immediate president, Honorable Uhuru, His Excellency Uhuru, also had an issue similar to that.
And he had violated court orders.
For him, yeah, at that time. Although for us, we obeyed most of the orders, I think, as far as I know.
We are disobeying one. Parliament is heading to public participation to
and I will deal
order.
with that just now.
Okay.
But I wanted to say this. You see, when you read the law about conservatory orders, one of the issues, one of the consideration, the basic consideration is public interest. So, is it in public interest, for example, for us to stop construction of the SGR? I'm just giving a hypothetical example. Is it in public interest to stop construction of a major road that is connecting an area of production, taking it to the market center in town? Is it in the interest of, is it a public interest? So some of those issues, people can complain. You can actually complain. And I don't see as, you know, I don't see that it is a problem to raise the issue and say, no, this is not fair, or I'm not feeling like I've been treated right. I think talking about an issue is not a bad thing. Now, you've raised the issue of public participation. You are saying that Parliament is disobeying the order of the court. There are a lot of technicalities here, but I'll just talk about
briefly
it
because we need to bring in Diana.
Yeah, I'll talk about it generally, but there are a lot of technicalities. Who was served, who is supposed to be subject to that order, and so on. You know, because I've not seen that order myself, I've not been served with that order myself.
It is the National Assembly.
Yeah, but I've not been served myself. So if I'm invited to go for that public participation. Am I in breach of the court order? And how was it fashioned? Against whom? Was it against the committee?
It stopped Parliament from conducting any business on the Housing Bill 2023.
Yes. Now, there's the other question now. After you finish, well, I think that's the technical bit. Yeah. But let's talk about the bigger issue. The bigger issue is there is a very clear demarcation of the role of the judiciary as far as dealing with statute is concerned.
Okay. Okay.
You can't stop Parliament from conducting its business, but you can strike out a law or an act of Parliament, yeah, when it is completed. You've gone through first reading, second reading, third reading. It has gone through all the processes, has been signed by the President. You can strike out that whole act. You can strike out a portion of that act. Okay. But then to interfere with the process in between, I think that is judicial overreach. Okay. So yes, that is the thinking, yeah, that I would imagine those members of Parliament may be having.
Thank you. Yes, Diana, please. I'll come to you.
Thank you very much. And to imagine that members of Parliament can plead ignorance around critical matters of process, of constitutionalism, of the rule of law is sad. And first, judicial authority, when exercised, is not under the direction of anyone. If you're aggrieved, then you move for review or you move for an appeal. You do not disregard that particular court order. And the entire period of December and January, the government, both the executive and the National Assembly and Parliament have been very busy in court. There has been a lot of litigation and orders being lifted, others being issued around, say, the Social Health Insurance Fund. So the same thing, if there are serious grievances around the housing bill, those must then continue to follow the judicial process. But when the clerk of the National Assembly disregards that, and I just want to advise my friend Joroge, if anybody has misguided him to go against the Constitution, unlike members of Parliament who are politicians and have a way, for him, he's appointed by the Parliamentary Service Commission. His best or safest haven is adhering to the Constitution. The minute he's held in contempt, okay, and possibly imprisoned for it, his position will be immediately advertised and somebody else will take it up. So I hope, as the clerk of the National Assembly, he will do the most honorable and natural and right thing to do. Follow the Constitution and not anything else. Now, Senator Mugatana raises the issue of whether we can discuss conservatory order, constitutional review, and luckily this is an area that has really evolved. Mm-hmm. And judicial review comes particularly for Kenya. When I was studying law, we used to rely heavily on jurisprudence from South Africa and the foundations of all this America, Federalist Papers and so on. And the thinking was you can have a majority government, a majoritarian government. And there's something that Kenya has perfected, is the art of majoritarian government that often thrives on tyranny of numbers. From the time of Jubilee, what the executive has done is ensuring they have very, very high numbers that weakens even the checks and balances within Parliament. When that happened, the limitation of power, the checks and balances tend to lean more on judicial authority.
But it's democracy. What forms the majority in Parliament is the people's mandate.
Yes.
Yes, they contest, then the mandate is accorded.
There is majority and there is majoritarian and tyranny.
Okay.
Those then become very, very different.
Which Parliament can avoid?
Yes.
For public interest.
Yes, yeah. They can do that.
And
but when they
has not. Why do you think so?
I really don't know. I hope the members of Parliament can answer. Yeah. For me, I think members of Parliament have failed to move from the previous regime of parliamentary system of government, allegiance to a political party. I wonder whether Parliament really understands their power under the Constitution. Because if they did, they would not come and tell us we were summoned to a parliamentary
group meeting.
Yeah, parliamentary.
PG.
PG, yeah. That one. That we were summoned and we took this position. They would realize the power and responsibility that they have been given in lawmaking, in budget making, in appointment of people to certain positions. Governor of the CBK, Director of Public Prosecution. Surely, who coerced you to take a decision of somebody that had questionable character? And the Constitution had already buffered you and guided you through Chapter 6. How on earth do we have debt that we cannot pay, debt that we never saw, and members of Parliament continued year in, year out, passing a new budget? Mm-hmm. I think Parliament must understand and seize their power rightfully. The same thing we are seeing with the judiciary asserting their independence.
Thank you.
Parliament must let us know that they are in charge of everything. And I think one of the things that we will invest in as civil society is telling Kenyans partly where the blame is and the responsibility of members of Parliament. It's not just to issue bursaries for CDF.
Yes.
It is protect us from the current mess and corruption that we are in.
Senator.
I think, Diana, to be fair to Parliament, Parliament didn't fire the shot. It's the executive that fired the shot.
On the judiciary.
On the impunity and the disrespect for court orders. So Parliament, it's an interesting
not around the judiciary. It is mainly around fiscal.
Yes, and I think that's fair enough. It's just that when we elites are having conversations, we tend to be very academic. If you look at some of the legislatures that we look up to, look at Congress, the Democrats and the Republicans. When the Republicans decided they're going to impeach Joe Biden, it never made sense to anybody, but they took a party position. When the Democrats decided to impeach Trump, it didn't make sense. He was an outgoing president, but they took a party position. So there's nothing wrong in party positions. I don't think we should be vilified for going into party caucuses and taking party positions, because those who are elected through a political party must abide by the vision of those parties that they belong to. I think it would be very academic to say that we can live in a situation where you have your own views, because Kenya is a multi-party democracy. That is a constitutional definition of a political system.
But what if the party position contravenes the public interest?
And I think that is why there needs to be robust debate. The manner in which parliamentary group meetings are conducted perhaps is what needs to be improved, so that people do not come for directions, but people have an opportunity to discuss. You see, in the UK, when the Labour or Conservative, they usually have annual conferences where they spend about 3 or 4 days just talking about party policy. Maybe that is the kind of discipline we need to build in Kenya, but it's going to take some time. But, going back to the very first conversation, there are certain privileges that we enjoy, Mungatana and I. When we are on the floor of the House, you cannot take me to court for what I said on the floor of the House. You cannot institute any litigation on the basis of what I said on the floor of the House. A member can challenge the veracity of the facts that I'm presenting, but you cannot use that to take me to court. The president also has certain immunities, and so does the judiciary. They have certain privileges and immunities that are designed to allow them to be fair, impartial, and unbiased when they are undertaking their work. So this conversation around the decisions of judges that are now being scrutinized and are now being scandalized, that conversation is completely out of order. I believe that the conversation that we need to be having with regards to the judiciary, the number one conversation must be on funding. And it must be funding that is not based on the benevolence of the person in power. You saw the president, one of the first executive decisions he made was to say he has increased the budget of the judiciary by 3 billion. Now, the presidency can only propose, but issues of budget and allocation must go through parliament. So you are seeing a judiciary that looks like a beneficiary of the benevolence of the executive. And how to address that is to establish a judiciary fund, which is already established. It is just that we don't finance it. We even have a parliamentary fund, which has already been defined, but has not been supported by regulations. What we need to be discussing is to provide functional, operational, and financial independence of the institutions that provide that delicate balance of power. And I think that that should be the starting point, that the judiciary does not have to go and beg from the presidency an extra 3 billion, 30 billion, 300 billion to do their work. That appropriation must be through parliament. The other thing that I've heard some of my colleagues advocate for, I heard the senator for Kiambu talk of coming up with certain amendments to have policy courts. For me, the most urgent thing is to address the corruption courts. If you are going to come up with timelines, let those timelines be to the corruption courts, not policy courts. And I think that there is scope and the space for conversation. Another one would be on adoption and investment in technology. Things have moved. We have moved to, and I'm glad that now a lot of sessions are being done virtually, and we see the judiciary progressively adopting technology, but it needs to be supported, needs to be funded. And civil society, I think this is an area which you would have the biggest impact if you can help the judiciary to adopt new technologies so that they can fast-track cases, so that a judge does not have to listen to a lawyer speaking slowly so that he can be able to take notes when there's technology that can do some of those things. And finally, the justice, law and order sector must be reviewed. And that is a conversation. In fact, if the president said that let the conversation be on the DCI, the same DCI that was accused of having been weaponized to settle political scores, we are seeing the same things today with the DCI. The deputy president was very vocal against the DCI. But what has the DCI evolved into? It's still the same thing. We are seeing the disappearance of people. We are seeing the rise of this world disappearing and reappearing. So I think there is a conversation around the justice, law and order sector. The EACC, in my view, and I deal with the EACC almost on a daily basis as the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, I do not think that it is fit for purpose. That should be the conversation, rather than the decisions that have been made by judicial officers who are exercising that authority on behalf of Kenyans.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let's get this soundbite from the Deputy President. We'll be shortly getting to that. But Senator Mungatana, given what we have talked about, and generally when you look at the criminal justice system, is it functioning as required? This coming in light of the Aror Kimware Dam scandal case, in which the judge had said that, look, this was clearly a matter that was meant to fail. I mean, it's also fair that we point out is that the investigative agencies and how they come up with cases where Kenyans have lost billions of shillings.
Yes. I needed to agree with you on that. That the conversation about the justice sector should not be just about the judiciary. I think even the other, because a prosecutor cannot win a case without the evidence being produced in court. And the evidence must be produced by witnesses. Those witnesses, some of them may be afraid to talk, so they need the Witness Protection Agency to be functional. So is the Witness Protection Agency being funded properly? We think not. Now, are witnesses being properly, produced before court? That is the work of the police, trying to prepare the witnesses together with the prosecution, so that they can be able to secure convictions. Now, the magistrate who is sitting to hear that case can only decide on the basis of the evidence that is before him or before her. If the evidence is not supporting the conviction, the case will fail. Now, then the question is, why didn't you produce material witnesses? Now, it's not the part of the court to do that. It is the prosecutor who should be asking, why didn't the police produce the witnesses that I wanted? Why are the statements that we had at before this case came up, we had these statements, the investigations had been carried out, why are the witnesses recanting these statements and saying that they never said that, or this was obtained through coercion and stuff like that? I think that's why I'm saying we need even to extend this conversation further than just the judiciary. But I wanted also to make this point. The independence of the judiciary, it is not just here in Kenya. It's an international concept, And the United Nations, they had a conference to define this independence of judiciary. And it was held in 1985 in Milan. And they set out the principles under which judges and judiciary as a whole can function. There was a time when judges were not sure they could go to even, to belong to a social club. There was a time that judges were pretty restricted lot. But then through this conference in 1985, it was actually allowed that judges can not only make or form judges associations, but they can also they have freedom of expression. Only that it should be within the confines of their office and dignify their offices whenever they are speaking. In Kenya, most of the judges have never used that bit. But when you look at all those principles, there are about 30 of them. None of them tries to suggest that none of them tries to encourage judicial activism. Judicial activism is where now you are trying to actually make law from the bench, okay? Now, in England, we've had great judges like Lord Denning. If you studied law, you would be familiar with that name. And they were, to a certain extent, involved in some form of judicial activism. But when you look at it, most of it, the judges have said that the principle of restraint has been more practiced over the years and in the precedents. So when you see, and you see this becomes very relevant, members of parliament are making law. Is it right to come in the afternoon when I'm on the floor of the House debating, Kajwang maybe has a different opinion, and I'm having a different opinion on a piece of legislation that is, I'm debating, and then you come and serve me with a court order saying that we cannot continue with that debate? What makes you think I will obey that order? Inside the House.
But Honorable Mungatana,
that is, let me finish.
Senator, okay, before
let me finish
proceed.
My point.
Okay,
let me finish my point.
I have to,
Let me finish my point so
okay.
that you can understand where I'm coming from.
Okay.
Is it correct to have judicial overreach? Are you saying that Parliament is smaller than you, that you can actually micromanage and supervise what Parliament is doing? This is the question that has bedeviled us for many years. How do we balance? And the balance is that let us have respect. Allow me to make my mistakes. Allow me to say what I have to say. If you believe that that law is wrong, okay, a citizen will come and say this law is wrong. And they will come before you. You will hear the arguments and you will strike that law out or sections of that law out. But then to stop it in the middle is not right. That is judicial overreach. And I wanted to say this. You know, I represented the members of Tana River County during the BBI case before the High Court. And when I went to the High Court, you know, they had advertised for public participation. The County Assembly had advertised through the clerk for public participation on a Thursday. Now people were preparing to go on a Thursday. Then Raila Odinga announces that there's going to be a Super Tuesday when all county assemblies should return the vote. And our county assembly, without the waiting for Thursday to happen, they passed it on a Tuesday. So I went before the judge. And you know, when the decision is passed, it's supposed to be transmitted from Tana River County Assembly to the county, to the National Assembly Speaker. So I went before the judge and I asked, Judge, can I have an order to stop the National Assembly and the Senate from receiving this faulty order from the county? You know what the judge told me? He told me, you cannot interfere, and this was Justice Ergon. You cannot interfere with the processes. And he told me, don't worry, counsel. This court has powers to undo anything that may be done to your disadvantage because this decision is wrong.
Because you are aggrieved against the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill 2020.
He said that we have to wait the process. When the process is over, I will nullify, and that's exactly what he did.
You talked about judicial activism, and in your submission you also mentioned that you are an aggrieved party as a result of the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill 2020, the BBI.
At that time, yes.
The High Court in May 2021 said this process was unconstitutional, null and void ab initio.
Correct.
Was that judicial activism?
No. You see, let me define.
Because the other party...
No, let me define.
Senator, why I pointed out that is, I mean, we need to be fair to all parties. Allow me to also make my point so that I'll give you the time you respond. Why I bring out that point is when the High Court ruled and made a determination to that effect regarding the BBI, the party that supported that cause said this is judicial activism through their lawyers. They were on record for saying that. Again, we are hearing a similar tone because the courts did not agree with you from you, members of the Kenya Kwanza administration.
Correct.
So therefore, we are placing the judiciary, the third arm of the government. Yes, there are concerns about corruption and integrity of judicial officials. But they are becoming a punching bag for you, the politicians. When they agree with you, well and fine, you all agreed with you. Kimani Ichung'wah tweeted, he said, fine, that's fantastic. Now they are ruling against government projects and based on what's presented before them, oh no, look, you are bad. I mean, when can we have done that substantive argument to understand that the courts of law rule on evidence that's presented before them in coming up with a determination?
Now, let's talk about that example you've given me. I've explained to you, Justice Ergon said, I'm not going to hold this decision from Tana River County Assembly. It has to be transmitted to the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Speaker of the Senate because they are still processing the BBI. And if there is a problem, I have the power as a High Court to order to undo every difficulty. So there is no judicial activism there because they finished the process. The process was finished and it was determined that what they were doing was wrong. Okay? So from where I sit, and with a lot of respect, there is a thin balancing. There's a thin balancing. When can we come in as judges or as the judiciary to stop a process in Parliament? And to me, the process should be stopped after it is finalized, declared wrong, and then that one we have to agree. And then there is the other thing.
Fair enough. I have had you. Allow me to bring in the Senator. Okay, Senator, brief, and then I'll come.
You know what Senator Mugatana is saying is, I mean, it's true, it's factual, and it's the established practice. What Justice Ergon advised him is established practice. We know, and in my experience in Parliament, that you cannot injunct Parliament. The courts cannot stop the enactment of a law, but it can stop a law from taking effect. Because the courts can wait until you've done all your processes and someone goes to court and says that this law should be struck out because, number one, it violates the Constitution, number two, there was no public participation, etc. And remember, before Israel attacked, before the fight between Israel and Palestine, one of the biggest threats to government in Israel was an attempt by the executive to come up with amendments to usurp the powers of the Supreme Court, because the court had power to look at legislation and check whether it was in line with the Constitution. There are certain jurisdictions where before a law takes effect, it must be put through a constitutional test. Is this law constitutional? In Kenya, we enact law and then we allow people to go to court. But even if we were to look at some of the laws that we have enacted, Senator Mugatana, you'll agree with me. The anti-doping bill even though we passed it before you came into, I think it was the last parliament, again, passed in 2 or 3 days. The courts cannot injunct you from fast-tracking, but someone can go to court saying that in 2 or 3 days, you cannot properly carry out public participation. Now, let's come to what the executive has been complaining about, that the courts seem to be stopping pet projects. But every Kenyan has got a right to petition Parliament or to go to court if they feel aggrieved on any matter. If a project was corruptly acquired, do we expect the judiciary to say that this is a matter of greater public good, so we should just allow it to continue and the corrupt to line their pockets? If a project violated certain environmental concerns, for example, you have decided that you're going to have a road that cuts across Nairobi National Park, and the political class has decided that it is going to be so, what stops a conservationist or any concerned Kenya from going to court? And if the court stops that kind of project, are we going to blame them? I believe, because that judicial authority that we have said is exercised on behalf of the people of Kenya, I believe that the judiciary then becomes the last bastion that ensures that the views of Kenyans and the interests of Kenyans are not subjugated by a ruling class, which sometimes thinks that it is about the supremacy of elected leaders. It is not about the supremacy of elected leaders. It is the supremacy of the people. And that is what the judiciary is out to safeguard.
Thank you. Yes, Diana, before we take the feedback.
Thank you very much. I think let's respect judicial authority. The current injunction is just a call to ensure that there is adequate public participation. I don't think that is something very, very problematic, and we should be moving more to just ensuring that people participate, share their views, then parliamentarians go and debate this comprehensively. But let me go back to the sentiments that were raised by the Deputy President around how the matter was handled, and link this to Arol Kimwarel and other matters. Now, as we address corruption in this country, one of the things that has been very, very difficult in the last 14 years of the Constitution is just knowing what is objective prosecution of corruption cases and what is politically driven prosecution. If there are certain people who hold political power and drive this, they need to be exposed. And luckily, we set up a robust constitutional framework. The ODPP ought to take up matters that they reasonably believe ought to be prosecuted, the EACC and so on. By the time these two institutions, the DCI, EACC, DPP, waste Kenyans' time and resources, only for a prosecutor to sit in court, never question a witness throughout the entire litigation. And the matter is then thrown out. Or we have a new government that is elected, and the DPP at that point withdraws en masse all the high-value corruption cases.
Thank you.
And no sanctions are meted. We have no discussion about it. Do we care about corruption? No, we don't. And we will continue to lament and cause Kenyans to bear the burden of a taxation, lack of development, and essential services. If there is anything that we must focus on this year, is how we address corruption and fiscal discipline. Otherwise, it is now eroding the very foundation.
Thank you.
Rule of law, education is going down the drain because it cannot be funded because money was stolen.
Thank you. Let's now sample the feedback here on the broadcast. I'll give you the final comments, 30 seconds, okay? I'm told we are off at the time. So let's take a look at the feedback and what you said on X, formerly Twitter, and this is what you are saying. The first one is from Samuel Owuth, who says, the head of state is right. They are rogue judicial officers, in his words, like any other section of the society, including the clergy. It is only the other day we had Shakahola debacle. Why hire a lawyer if you can pay a judge? The second one is from Eric Otondi. He says the president should be a reflection of the kind of leadership that we need as a country. Failing to respect the rule of law and the constitution, therefore, is a reflection of the impunity within the government, which should be condemned. Next is Nick Changer. He says, is the judiciary communicating some truth on the president's allegations? Why demonstrate? Why the unease? I'm afraid that they are being defensive. The next is from Bobo Tieno Owino. He says, if the judiciary is right, working by the guidance of the 2010 Constitution, then why is CJ Kome calling for a dialogue with the executive? Your guess is as good as mine. Something is wrong with the judiciary. Reverend Harry_Koskei says, let the two arms of government, i.e. the judiciary and the executive, meet and resolve those allegations as requested by the Chief Justice, even for Osoro and Arati, too, for our healthy nation. I mean, that's what he means. God bless. MC_Ruma says, judiciary is the last line of defense for Kenyans. Parliament has been compromised. It's now rubber stamp for the executive. A president that wants to disorder court orders is courting anarchy. J. Musoma says the executive has gone rogue on independent institutions. They compromised Parliament, interfered with the composition of the IEBC. The opposition went to bed with the church and now want to silence the judiciary, then come for us when there is no one to defend us. Up next is from Ogira_Jasper. He says the greatest threat to our laws comes from politicians, not the judiciary. Opposition MPs or leaders waxing holy about judiciary are playing politics just like Ruto/KK will do. Or they in the opposition politicians want checks. This one is from Fred Okango. For as long as an order from a court of competent justification exists, the order shall be obeyed to the letter. Kenya Kwanza are contemptuous and disobedient and discourteous to the judiciary, its authority and officers. Up next is from Daniel Sindani 78. He says, insist what's going on between the judiciary and the executive is healthy for a constitutional democracy. It's only the legislature that's not doing its work by taking sides. The legislature should do its job and take sides. Your time is all appreciated. We are pressed for time. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Much appreciated for the discussion here and making time for the broadcast. And Happy New Year, because this was the first time you were here.
Happy New Year.
Danson Mungatana is the Senator. Tanariva County. Diana Gishengu is the National Coordinator. The Institute of Social Accountability. And Senator Moses Kajwang represents Homa Bay County here. And Happy New Year to Safina Chiengoma, who is coming up next with the next segment here. And we'll see you tomorrow morning here on the broadcast. Till then, good morning.